I'm going to start this video with some backstory, so let's go back to the past for a moment. The year was 2008, and I was a little 10-year-old fetus just getting into anime and manga. I did have previous exposure to that side of the industry, of course, thanks to shows like Digimon and the bastardized 4Kids dub of Tokyo Mew Mew. Don't bully me, please, I was an innocent child. But I was completely unaware of that fact at the time. I think the show that ultimately got me falling down the rabbit hole and never coming back out was Powerpuff Girls Z. Yes, there is an anime adaptation of the Powerpuff Girls. The more you know. You can look it up if you're intrigued by this information like I was. And actually, that show was the major driving force for me to create my own story, and it was one that I spent the better part of 6 years working on. Unfortunately, it didn't really go anywhere, which is kinda tragic when you consider the fact that I reworked the heck out of it who knows how many times hoping it would go somewhere. In all fairness though, I didn't have an original bone in my body at the time, so... yeah, this really wasn't it. This project underwent several name changes, but for a good few years in the later half of its existence, it was known simply as 26. At some point, the story was heavily influenced by Bleach, and at one point, multiple aspects of the story were borrowed from Bleach, including the existence of other realms and other humanoid races with different abilities, right down to the structure of the Gotei 13, aka the 13 Court Guard Squads, or whatever you want to call them. I mean, the primary organization of the good guys in 26 was, at one point, straight up called the 26 Squads. Nice going, 14-year-old me! Fortunately, it did get some semblance of originality in its later years, and for a while it was supposed to be the sweeping magnum opus of the rise and fall of the organization at the forefront. It did get a name change towards the end, and by 2014 it was known simply as the Order of 26. For a long time, I didn't have any plans to revisit 26 at all, considering most of the characters have either been dropped or moved to other projects, but in recent months, I started to wonder what it would look like if I revived it. In fact, I've started working on a potential remake, and I've already got a lot of ideas going on in my head. Forming in the primordial soup, if you will. 26 was meant to be a darker and edgier take on the magical girl genre about a group of 8 high school students, each controlling a certain element, fighting monsters and alien-like humanoid beings from another world. Some of those monsters were heavily influenced by the Hollows and the Arrancar, also from Bleach. Despite the intention of it being darker and more angsty, being in my early teens at the time meant the execution went south in more ways than one. And as all good weeb children do, I'm sure, I set the story in a fictional city in Japan, and I believe all of the main characters were either half or fully Japanese, with the exception of the main character, her sister, and her best friend. As of right now, the remake of 26 takes place in Rome in the near future. Going full-on magical girl is not quite where I would take the story now, but I still want some aspect of that if that makes any sense. Personally, I want to keep the magical girls wielding elements aspect of it, but take it in a different direction from that starting point. Obviously, none of this is final, but as of right now, I'm thinking there's 2 forms of magic, and the users of one type of magic have been feuding with the users of the other form of magic for ages. I also want to incorporate some nature and music themes, the latter because the tentative names of the magic types are resonance and dissonance, but that's off topic. I imagine the main characters and all of the good guys could be part of this organization full of people, effectively knights, aligned with one form of magic that have all sworn an oath to protect humanity. And that as the story progresses, the millennia-long fight between both factions culminates in something more. No spoilers. But of course, with this new coat of paint for the story, that means all of the characters need new designs, and for almost all of them, new names as well. So let's move on to the first batch of these designs. If you're new here and you want to see me hop in the proverbial time machine and bring this story back from the abyss, then make sure to like and subscribe. But with all of that said, strap your butts in because here we go! Since I'm redesigning the main cast of my old story, it's only natural that we would start with the protagonist. Her name has changed several times over the years that 26 was in quote-unquote production, including Terra Orimono and Yumi Orimono, but her new name now, and hopefully the one that sticks, is Teresa Kazetani Belmonte. Kazetani being a rare Japanese surname combining the characters for Wind and Valley, and Belmonte meaning Beautiful Mountain, both of which I think are interesting nods to the power she had in the old version of the story. Although I'm not sure why I'm saying that like I changed her power, since she still has the same power. Her old surname Orimono is actually one of the many things that I swiped from Google Translate. Shameless, I know. And I didn't want that for the new versions of the characters. They all deserve better. Especially Teresa. So let's get briefly into Teresa's backstory before I tackle anything else. The third of 4 children, Teresa was the daughter of a retired magical girl, for lack of a better term, and a father who lost his life in a freak accident when Teresa was still very young. In later versions of 26, it was her mother who got the short end of the stick in that regard, but that element remained mostly the same. Teresa would live a relatively peaceful life for the next few years, but that incident would haunt her ever since. Her family ran a pharmacy on the ground floor of their apartment building, and things would remain normal for her until she met a strange alien being who called herself Eureka. I want to talk about her too at some point, since she has a bit of her own lore as well. We'll see. Teresa gained her powers through the act of saving her best friend from a strange monster, and she's a lone wolf for a brief period of time before her friend gains powers of her own. Originally, Teresa was a stoic, nonchalant 14-year-old girl who was, according to the dedicated PowerPoint I made for the story back in 2012, originally bored and dull, but opened up as the story progressed. Well, at least I was being honest. In later versions of the story, it was the loss of her mother that turned her cold and emotionally distant, swearing her life to revenge against the otherworldly forces that changed her life forever. Teresa was also fiercely protective of her friends and family and always did her best to be a good leader for the group, even though a couple of her teammates were initially willing to nitpick all of her shortcomings. In the earlier versions of the story, Teresa was the captain of the 26th Division of the 26 Squads, later called the Order of 26. She later lost that captain status when I did a hard reboot of the story later in 2012, and instead she found herself somewhere in the middle ranks of the Order. In the new version, and I think this is the change that I'm the most keen on in regards to Teresa specifically, I don't want her to be the leader of her team anymore. Yes, she is the main character, but my vision for her is that she's a new member of the Order when the story begins. And it just defies all logic for her to become the destined captain of a whole division of knights, right after gaining powers, and with no combat experience. Which is exactly what happened in the old version of 26. What A-tier storytelling, am I right? I mentioned earlier that Teresa and a couple other people were the exceptions to the whole everyone in the main cast being fully Japanese thing, and that brings me to one of the main things I want to change about the main cast as a whole. Teresa and her sister in the original story were half British, and her best friend Arietta was half French. I want to diversify the cast for the reboot, and I guess this counts as a minor spoiler, but all of the main characters now come from various places throughout the world. Though they all have their own reasons as to how they wound up in Rome, where the new version of 26 takes place. For Teresa, I changed things up just a bit and made her half Japanese and half Italian, having been born and raised in Florence, but studying in an undisclosed university in Rome. I haven't decided on a major for her just yet, but I imagine it would have something to do with literature. That feels very Teresa of her. I also want to spare Teresa's parents this time around, and instead have her older sister meet an unfortunate end several years before the beginning of the story. I also want to keep that stoic, nonchalant part of her in some capacity, but still have her be a genuinely nice and caring person deep down, even if she doesn't really show it all the time, or even pushes people away. Though that one would probably be more out of fear that what happened to her older sister could happen to her friends. And going through that ordeal a second time would be the absolute last thing she wants. I also imagine that Teresa would, at the start, feel... I don't want to say powerless because that's not the right term, but she would want to know exactly what happened to her sister and who or what was responsible. But she'd have no idea where to look until she joins the Order. And that particular event gives her a new sense of purpose, so to speak. Teresa would open up to her new friends as the story progresses, but I think that instinct of isolating herself from everyone would be something she never shakes off entirely, since that's the sort of thing that just doesn't change overnight. With the original 26 being heavy on the action, heavy on the fights and whatnot, that meant that everyone needed some sort of weapon to help them in combat. Teresa's weapon, or buki, thank you Google Translate, was called Yukitaka, which I believe was the result of me typing Snowhawk into the Japanese setting on Google Translate. It was a serrated longsword with a handle that vaguely resembled a chakram. It's actually one of my favorite weapon designs to come out of that story, so I wanted to keep it in some capacity. But as I was working on the concepts for the new versions of the characters, I realized I had a problem. There was another character on Teresa's team who also wielded a sword. To be fair though, this was remedied after the 2012 reboot when I gave Teresa a weapon that was a cross between a crossbow and a musket, but the problem was still there beforehand. Good grief, I can't believe I let that one slide. Call me picky, but your girl needs variety. So instead of a sword, I chose to give Teresa a spear/lance-like weapon. I thought it would be cool for her, and nobody in the original version used a spear, so this seemed like the perfect solution. To be honest, however, I'm not sure how I feel about the design of Teresa's spear, so I might go back and work on it in the future. Everyone's combat outfits changed over the years, from the colors to the general designs, but for the remake, I'm basing their new outfits on the 2011 designs, where everyone's uniform was predominantly dark green and black with a third color that reflected their element in some way. Teresa's element was and still is wind, and as such her color was light blue, though before that it was pink in accordance with magical girl tradition. However, to further distinguish her from that aforementioned other sword user, whose color was a darker shade of blue, I decided to make Teresa's new signature color teal. Just about everyone's character designs were also shameless, heavy rip-offs of other designs that I thought were cool at the time, and that's another thing that I really want to change in the remake. Teresa's new design is actually one I had a bit more trouble with. Some characters changed a lot between their old and new versions, while others didn't change that much. Teresa was kind of in the middle, but leaning towards the former. For a lot of the characters, I drew on a combination of their 2011 designs and their 2012/2013 designs. Teresa's design leans more toward her 2011 version. The main reason I struggled so much with Teresa's new design was because I couldn't really pin down a hairstyle for her. I originally envisioned her hairstyle being something closer to her old one, before giving her a longer ponytail, before realizing that none of those hairstyles were what I had in mind for her. Until I saw this one picture, I don't remember where exactly I found it anymore, but knowing me, it was probably Pinterest, of a sort of crown braid updo, and it was then that everything else fell into place. Teresa's outfit is in a bit of a weird gray area between form-fitting and loose, and has a more feminine lean than most of the rest of the cast. I also want to make each character's outfit as distinct as possible, and also I just want to give them a bit more spice than they originally had. So for Teresa, I went with the puffy sleeves and a skirt that's open on one side, while giving her a more form-fitting bodice. I also gave her armor that goes all the way up to her thighs, mostly for the aesthetic, but also so she doesn't get her legs chopped off or something. That would be bad. Oh, and you may not see it because it's almost entirely obscured in this drawing, but I wanted to give Teresa some sort of ribbon-like ornament on the back of her dress. And you'll also see that I gave her ribbons on the backs of her shoes. I don't know, the ribbons seem very fitting for her design. Going back to the element bit, I want to expand on everyone's elemental capabilities in the remake of 26. Since in the original version, everyone was just throwing their base element all over the place, to put it very simply. I still want Teresa to be able to do anything air and wind related, so maybe she could modify the atmospheric pressure around her or walk on open air if she wanted to. Or she could literally knock the air out of someone's lungs in a fight, or maybe summon miniature cyclones. Whatever she does with her element, she will have absolutely no combat experience at the start of the story, so I imagine that Teresa would figure out what usage of her element works best for her as she finds herself as a member of the Order and as a magic user. That could be very fun to write about. But I think that's enough about Teresa, so let's move on to the next member of her team. Next up is Teresa's best friend and second in command, a shy and quiet young woman named Elea Waldmeier. Though in the olden days, she was called Arietta Inago, and then Asami Inago, and then Leticia Inago. Yeah, I had a tendency to juggle character names a lot. Well, I still do sometimes. Like Teresa, Elea's name has some meaning associated with her in some way. In ancient Athens, Elea, or Eleos, was the personification of clemency, mercy, compassion, and pity, and was the counterpart of the Roman goddess Clementia, which I feel is pretty indicative of this Elea's personality. I kinda want to keep the name association system in some way, shape, or form for the remake of 26, whether their names are reflective of their elements, personalities, or anything else that's a part of their character. Anyhow, in the earliest versions of the story, Elea was the childhood best friend of Teresa, and they were in the same class in high school. Elea was the second person to join the team right after Teresa, and if I remember correctly, it was Teresa awakening her powers that directly led to Elea gaining hers. Please forgive me, it's been a long time since I wrote the OG script, and unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, it's been lost to time. As far as I remember, Elea was an only child, and in the 2012 reboot of 26, she spent several months in training prior to joining the Order of 26, and at 13, she was one of the youngest members of the Order. What even is a 13-year-old doing with a bunch of knights? Where are this girl's parents? In the later versions of the story, Elea was secretly some sort of experiment, and I think she was meant to be the vessel of the story's designated MacGuffin, a crystalline object called the Tama with the power to rewrite entire universes according to the will of the one who wields it. I call it a MacGuffin because even though it was important to the characters and was the driving force behind the motivations of the villains especially, it wasn't as important in itself as it should have been, and the ongoing centuries-old war between good and evil took precedence over the Tama's existence. Just like a traditional MacGuffin. Elea was originally the second highest ranking member of Teresa's team, but in the new version, I want to make her a pretty new knight with only a couple of years of experience. Not too different from Teresa. This current iteration of Elea was born and raised in Switzerland and received her training there, but was transferred to Italy at the request of her superiors, who thought she would have a better chance at thriving as a full-fledged knight there. Elea's new backstory isn't set in stone just yet, but I imagine her being raised among the other knights after being left in their care by her parents at a very young age. As such, she doesn't really remember who her parents are, but she sees the knights as her family and is saddened by the prospect of leaving her home, but decides to make the most of her transfer to Rome. Hey, that rhymes. She and Teresa are complete strangers in the remake, only meeting when Teresa joins the knights, but they become very good friends as the story progresses, helping each other during missions and just generally boosting each other's morale the way that they did in the old version. Then again, the entire main cast becomes pretty tight-knit on the whole anyway. In the 2011 version of the story, Elea was a kind and bubbly person and an avid avoider of negative influences. Later on, she became more shy and withdrawn, but would become pretty scary when angry and was willing to punish anyone who disobeyed the sacred code of the Order. In the remake, Elea has a very sweet, albeit withdrawn and kinda timid personality, and is always willing to help everyone else on her team, even if she has to spend a few hours working up the courage to do so. However, Elea is quite strict in regards to the code that the knights follow. She follows every rule to a T, takes the Knight's Oath to protect humanity very seriously, and gets irritated when someone violates a rule on purpose. A rare occurrence, but it does happen sometimes. She is a lot more forgiving if, let's say, a novice breaks one of the rules by accident, as she has been in their shoes before. And I imagine this is what motivated Elea to extensively study the rules of the knights in the first place to save herself from any future embarrassment. As for the whole vessel of the MacGuffin bit, I don't think I'm gonna keep that in since that's not in my vision for the new Elea. But I will say... actually, you know what? No, never mind. I did say no spoilers after all. Elea's weapon was a scythe called Gyakuyuki. Apparently, this was the result of me typing inverse snow into Google Translate. And in the 2012 reboot, I switched it out with a mage's staff. For the remake, I gave Elea her scythe back and redesigned it so the logistics of the scythe itself would make a bit more sense. The old version of Elea's weapon was... To be honest, I'm not sure how it would have worked since I don't think there would be much support for the blade with the handle thingy shaped the way it was, but as I've mentioned in the past, younger me didn't care much about rhyme or reason. I will confess I kinda winged the weapon design here, but I absolutely love how it turned out. The all-black palette with the ends of the blades fading to a whitish color and the embedded gem also being white for the contrast is... chef's kiss. With her wielding a scythe that's about as long as she is, I imagine Elea would be pretty strong. Definitely not the strongest physically, but strong enough to carry a scythe that weighs at least 12 pounds or thereabouts and swing it with relative ease. Elea's new design is a combination of her iterations from 2011 and 2012. I took the color scheme and her signature color from her 2011 version, and several design aspects of her 2012 version, since her 2011 outfit wasn't what I had in mind for this new version of Elea at all. And while I'm on the subject, the blue and gold color scheme of the 2012 outfits wasn't what I wanted for the new designs either. My favorite of Elea's old designs was actually an outfit that I made for her after a 3-year time skip that was supposed to take place in the story. I gave her shoulder guards, a little cape that goes around her shoulders, and her hair was tied into a ponytail with a ribbon to secure it. For her new outfit, I kept the cape and the shoulder guards and the little ruffles at the bottom of her skirt, while heavily modifying just about everything else. though I also kept the corset-like thing she originally had in some capacity. I also gave her armor for her right arm, since it is her dominant arm, and also because she uses her scythe quite a lot in combat, so the armor is there to prevent any mishaps. And you may also see she still has the bow at the back of her head, but her hair isn't in a high ponytail anymore. Elea is also rounder in appearance, and she has larger eyes as a reflection of her softer, kinder personality, in contrast to Teresa, who's a bit more angular in stature as a reflection of her more stoic and mature personality. One of the things I want to work on is getting rid of the same face syndrome that plagued my art for most of my life, so hopefully this is a step in the right direction. Everyone on the team has a different element, and Elea's is ice. The signature color of her older iteration was white to reflect this, and I think her signature color would still be white, but for the new version I chose to add some silver accents for variation. In every iteration, Elea always had blonde hair and greenish eyes, and her eyes were quite bright at one point, but I want to emphasize her ice theme even more, and as such I made her hair and her eyes even paler than they used to be. With Elea's element being ice, she can immediately freeze water and any molecules in the air. However, the catch with Elea's power specifically is that she relies heavily on her scythe to wield her element effectively. In other words, she can't create ice if her weapon isn't involved. I imagine this would have been a pretty big nuisance for her during her training, but she eventually found a way to work with it. So let's say during a fight she focuses all of her energy into her scythe and just unleashes waves of ice with each swing. Or she makes everything that the scythe touches turn to ice. And because her scythe would give her a huge range, I imagine she would have the edge over her opponents in some regard. But because she can only use her elemental energy with the help of her scythe, she would have great difficulty in hand-to-hand combat. And speaking of hand-to-hand combat, let's move on to the member of the team who specializes in exactly that. Now we are going to the character who changed the least for this redesign. Come to think of it though, they're probably tied with Elea for the character who changed the least, but whatever the case may be, they changed so little that of the 8 main characters of 26, they are the only one who kept their original given name. And also the character whose illustration I struggled with the most. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Shika Kurosawa, or Kurosawa Shika in Eastern name order, was the third member of Teresa's squadron, at the time named Shika Hanajima. Shika meaning deer, and Hanajima being a combination of the characters for flower and island. At least I'm pretty sure that's what it means. In keeping with the name trend for the new versions of these characters, though, Shika's new family name Kurosawa is a combination of the characters for Black and Marsh. The black being a nod to both their signature color and their new element. I'll get into that in a bit. The backstory I had for Shika was poorly developed at best, but by the time they joined Teresa and Elea, the three of them were practically strangers. Shika wasn't a part of Teresa's regular friend group, and for the most part kept to themselves. It was during a typical monster of the day kind of battle that Shika got caught up in the mess that Teresa and Elea were in, and they awakened their powers as a result, becoming the third seat of the 26th Division. You know, just to drive home the heavy Bleach rip-off vibes of the original version. And I'm not even doing that for the sake of the memes, it was an actual thing. Art gods help us all. Shika was meant to be the most naturally inclined fighter of the group, but I honestly don't remember doing as much with their fighting ability as I could have, because, like I said, I only flesh out the backstories of Teresa and her sister and a few other characters. That's something I want to change so it doesn't seem like everyone else is just there for the sake of being there. So, what do I have in mind for the new Shika as of right now? Admittedly, not much, but I do have some sort of foundation in place. The new Shika was born and raised in Japan, but eventually came to Italy for reasons very different from Elea's. I'm still not sure of the circumstances that would make Shika move to Rome, but they've since gotten along quite well with the other knights, and are now a trusted member of the Italian branch of the Knights. The original Shika was, according to the PowerPoint I made in 2012, calm and partially cold. And honestly, that would still be true with the new Shika, but also different in multiple ways. Shika is a very level-headed person, but pretty awkward as far as social interactions go, especially when talking to strangers. As such, it would take them a while to get used to Teresa when she joins the group, but I think their similar ancestry and shared calm demeanor would allow them to connect on some level. Still though, I can only imagine that a first meeting between them would just be quite awkward and filled with equally awkward silence. Shika might come off as cold at first because, again, they're not very good with new people, and also because they're a lot more introverted than the rest of the cast. but they are still a very calm and very generous person who does their best to help the rest of the team in any way they can. Also, if you collect music records like they do, chances are they'll be your bestie for life. There were actually 2 characters that didn't make it into the hard reboot of 26. Shika was one of them. I think it was because I finally realized that having 8 main characters would be a disaster to keep track of, although I plan on bringing all 8 of them back for the remake, so I can't say I've learned my lesson. I think I just have a thing for ensemble cast, to be honest. When I decided to metaphorically revive the cast of 26, one of the gripes I had was that all of them were cis-het women. There's nothing wrong with a bit of girl power, but it was one of the things that just rubbed me the wrong way. So perhaps the biggest change I've made with Shika, outside of their new design, is that they are now agender, or in other words, someone whose gender identity is being either genderless or neutral. But according to Merriam-Webster, it can also mean a person who has an internal sense of being neither male nor female nor some combination of male and female. I am aware that not everyone who identifies as non-binary or who otherwise falls outside of the gender binary has to be androgynous, but I want to say, more out of clarity and transparency than anything else, that Shika, even back in 2011, was more masculine-leaning than the rest of their teammates. They were also pretty athletic and sporty and were the type of person who excelled in gym class. I think Shika would still have some experience with sports, including boxing and wrestling. I still have to iron that out some more. Originally, Shika wore a sleeveless tunic, which later became a sleeveless hoodie, trousers, arm warmer type thingies, and had their hair kept in a low ponytail. For Shika's new design, I gave them a completely new outfit that's mostly form-fitting while having their jacket be tied around their waist to make their design more interesting. I also gave them an asymmetrical shirt coat thing and arm warmers under their gauntlets for extra padding. Shika's hair is also shorter now, and is also black at the roots and several other places, and in keeping with the meaning of their given name, I've given them tufts of hair on either side of their head to resemble deer ears, even though you can't really see it on their illustration, and you may also notice the rectangular pupils that actual deer have. What can I say, we like motifs in this house. Shika's weapon was called Hayabusa, the product of typing falcons into Google Translate, or something to that effect. They were a set of claw-like weapons that could be used to fight at close range, but before they were claws, and this is something that I completely forgot about until I rummaged through my older drawings for this video, it took the form of a bow. How would this thing even work? Also, why does the arrow look like that? Actually, you know what, never mind. I'm not gonna question 14-year-old me's decisions anymore. A trip to the past is a trip to the realm of creative decisions that defy all logic. And I am embracing that fact. At least I will try to without losing my brain cells. For the new Shika, I chose to give them a completely new weapon that's still in line with the one they used to have. Since they specialize in hand-to-hand combat, I thought it would be fun to give them a pair of gauntlets with pointy fingertips as a reference to the claws that they used to wield. Originally, Shika's element was gravity, but I wasn't really feeling it for their new concept. So instead, after racking my brain for possible new elements that would go with Shika's signature color, which is black, I went with shadows. So they can do anything with the shadows in the room, make their surroundings go completely dark, or even use their own shadow to fight alongside them, which would honestly make for some interesting combat scenarios during fight scenes. However, despite their impressive combat abilities, and despite being one of the more experienced members of the team, I thought it would be hilariously ironic if Shika were unable to wield any weapon other than their fists. Like, it wouldn't even be a matter of strength or even a matter of disdain for using anything else. In fact, they would genuinely be invested in trying to learn how to wield anything other than their gauntlets. They would just be extremely clumsy in going about it. For example, they would try wielding Elea's scythe and go, "How do you swing this thing again?" And after several attempts, they just end up putting a hole in the wall by accident. Or 2. Or 5. Someone help them. Anyway, before I start to ramble, let's now go from one of the characters who underwent the least amount of change to the one who probably changed the most. And now we are moving on to the last character that I'm covering in this video. Going from the character that, again, arguably changed the least, to one of the characters that went through the most changes between her old version and her new one. Originally, this lady was Teresa's older sister Rika Orimono, although in later versions she went by Kasai Orimono, but her new name for the remake is Idalia Mosley. Idalia being a Greek name meaning behold the sun, though I also read somewhere that it's also an Italian name, but I think I'm getting off topic. Since the sun is associated with fire and light and warmth, it only felt natural for a character whose element is fire. The second oldest of the Orimono siblings, Idalia was about a year older than her sister Teresa. I'm pretty sure they were both in high school at the start of the story, but again, the OG script has been lost to time. Before the 2012 reboot, Idalia was the 4th seat of the 26th Division and a bit of a lone wolf. She would sometimes butt heads with her teammates and sometimes even her own sister because she thought their ideas would end in disaster. The loss of her mother did affect the original Idalia in some way, because, again, she used to be biological sisters with Teresa, but I didn't really brush on the effects it had on Idalia as much as I did with Teresa. After the 2012 reboot, I gave Idalia a bit more depth to her backstory. She had tried and failed twice to join the Order, only able to join after the previous holder of her position, number 8, defected. Because she was able to get in at such a high position, many people, including Teresa, put high expectations on her. But she was still able to remain calm and collected even in the most dire situation. In the remake, Idalia and Teresa will no longer be related, but I still want them to be very good friends, and I imagine that they'd have a sister-like bond by the end of the story. The new version of Idalia grew up in England and is part of a long line of knights, but found her way to Rome for university-related reasons, since she also wanted to pursue her degree, probably something business-related, on top of her knight training. It was sometime during her first or second year that she was scouted by and asked to join the Italy branch of the Knights of the Alder, to which Idalia said yes. Idalia is a very talented knight, a very ambitious sort of woman, and is currently being considered for the position of knight captain by the time the story begins. Idalia's personality hasn't really changed all that much from her old version. She's still very laid back, looks at things from a rational standpoint, and always assesses any and all potential next steps in regards to her plans or any missions she and the rest of the team may have. Being an ambitious person, Idalia's plans may sometimes get a little too grandiose, but she always has contingencies on top of contingencies and is willing to adjust those plans if she needs to. Now, since I feel that this is worth bringing up, I am fully aware of the stereotype of characters of color like Idalia having aggressive, violent, or otherwise malicious personalities, and I am also aware of the angry black woman stereotype, although, as I understand it, that stereotype in particular mainly applies to black American women. I'm actually not sure if the stereotype, and if so, how much, also applies to black British women like Idalia, but either way I am doing my best to actively avoid those stereotypes. And aside from her calm and rational demeanor, I also want to mention that Idalia usually ends up being the brains of the group. However, I also want to be transparent in mentioning that Idalia can be a little blunt sometimes and won't hesitate to give someone a reality check if she knows they need to hear it. But that's because Idalia genuinely cares about the rest of her team, and she doesn't want anything bad happening to her teammates, and it's never out of malice. All of that said though, in regards to the whole actively avoiding stereotypes bit, please let me know if I've done something stupid, because most of the time I have no idea if I've done something stupid. I'm just a silly hermit crab at the end of the day, so if I've made a blunder, I promise it's not intentional. It's just that the issue has gone 12 miles above my head. But let's get back to Idalia's redesign before I veer too far off topic. Idalia's old design was very different from what I've envisioned for her new one. Like the rest of the cast, or those who survived the 2012 reboot anyway, Idalia had at least 2 very distinct designs over the years. Saying that because I've lost track of how many design changes she went through. There were many versions of 26 over the years with many different characters and many different storylines, not just the ones I've mentioned in this video, but talking about that would take 3 hours by itself. Originally, Idalia had a coat with loose sleeves, a fashionable red scarf and trousers tucked into a pair of ankle-length shoes with a butt cape. I don't know what this article of clothing is called. I've only ever seen it be called the butt cape, so we're just rolling with it, I guess. Anyway, her design changed radically after 2012, like her sister. In the early stages of the reboot, she kept her 2011 design in some capacity, but that was quickly phased out in favor of a more sporty outfit which consisted of a form-fitting overcoat with a long tail over a black shirt, shorts, thigh-length stockings, and knee-length boots. Idalia's new design is a major departure from that. Her outfit is a lot more stylish in appearance. Not to say it wasn't before, but her original outfit just doesn't match her aesthetic or personality anymore. So this new design leans a little more vintage and chic for lack of a better term. And I also gave her ribbons for her shirt and one of her boots. Idalia's design now is a bit asymmetrical as well, particularly with the mismatched gloves and the front of her coat, but I still wanted to keep both sides of her outfit balanced. And as a fun little Easter egg, Idalia's pupils are triangles, and upright triangles are the alchemical symbol for fire. For those who may not know, I have another character, Safia, whose eyes take after alchemical symbols in some way, but I just couldn't help myself here. Idalia's weapon was originally named Hinotori, or Firebird in Google Translate. I could have sworn that it was originally a claymore, but as it turns out, it was actually a scythe with a very peculiar design. Which meant there were 2 scythe wielders on the team. Yay! I legit could have sworn I gave her a claymore, but my memory somehow got jumbled up and I actually didn't. So, I gave her one here. Like Elea's scythe, I high-key winged the design of Idalia's claymore. I wanted to give it some bulk and make it look somewhat interesting without having it look too crazy, so you'll see that it flares out at the base and then tapers out towards the end. I also had the guard of the sword itself be curved and made sure the hilt was long enough to accommodate both of Idalia's hands while she's swinging it around. And lastly, I incorporated a series of jewels into the hilt and the guard for the aesthetic. Idalia's element is fire, and this could be shown a bit better than what you're seeing on screen, but I have been considering giving her a phoenix motif, since the name of her original weapon meant firebird, if Google Translate is anything to go by. Then again, Google Translate can't really be trusted. So I could probably have her elemental aura look like flaming feathers, or maybe feathers or wing-shaped flames could appear when she's attacking, or maybe she can channel her elemental energy into her blade so that it's hot to the touch. But obviously not hot enough for the metal to melt. And since her name is sun-related, maybe she could have some control over heat as well, but I'm not sure if that would qualify as a different element. And I say that because I have Elea, who controls ice, but I also have another character for the story who controls the cold itself. So going by that logic, that would mean fire and heat are 2 different elements. I did say none of this is final, so I do want to iron this stuff out before I set it in stone. But that should be the last of the redesigns for this video done and dusted, so let's take a look at the finished products before my vocal cords give out. And those were the first 4 characters for this little redesign series. I do plan on doing the other 4 main characters and maybe the villains once I have time to do so if you're interested in seeing the rest of Teresa's team get redesigns of their own, and also if you like this video and want to see more art-related videos and shenanigans from me, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I post new videos every other Friday, usually about drawing, but sometimes I'll talk about other stuff as well. Also, if you made it this far, leave a cloud emoji in the comment section below. And also let me know if you have a favorite of the 4 redesigns, or if any of them stuck out to you in particular. If you want to support me further, please check out my other social media accounts, as well as my Ko-fi and my Etsy shop, which are all in the description. And lastly, remember to keep things civil in the comments, or I will put a whoopee cushion in your chair when you least expect it. And yeah, that's about everything. It is time for me to save my vocal cords before they give out or something. Thanks for watching.